The roast chicken filled the kitchen with a warmth that didn't reach the people in it.
Owen stood at the counter, knife in hand, slicing methodically.
The sharp blade whispered across the wooden board like it had secrets to keep. Across from him, Lena sat at the table scrolling through her phone, her eyes flicking up just once to deliver the line like it was part of the weather report. "You overcooked the carrots again," she said, without looking at him.
Owen didn't flinch.
Didn't sigh. Just placed the steaming chicken thigh on her plate, added a spoonful of potatoes, and yes, some of those overcooked carrots.
He set it down gently in front of her, like he was still trying.
But Lena didn't touch the food. She locked her phone, folded her hands, and said it so quiet, so surgical, it almost missed his ears. "I want out." Owen blinked once. Not shocked, just processing, like a machine that needed a moment to restart. He didn't sit, didn't ask, just kept slicing. "I'm done," she added, more to herself than to him. He nodded finally. "Okay." Silence stretched out like smoke. Only the ticking of the clock above the fireplace and the soft scraping of the knife against wood kept time moving. Lena stared at him, irritated now. "That's it."
Owen looked up at her, calm as still water. "Eat while it's hot." No reaction.
"No questions," she snapped. "You're just gonna pretend it doesn't matter." He paused. Let the knife rest against the chicken. "I'll sign the papers tomorrow." Lena wasn't expecting that. Not from a man she'd spent nearly 30 years with.
Owen wasn't cold or cruel, but he'd always been methodical.
A thinker.
A planner. The kind of man who measured twice before planting a tree, who researched appliances for weeks before buying a toaster.
She thought he'd at least ask why. Maybe argue. Maybe beg. "I've already talked to a lawyer," she said, pressing, trying to find the emotion she wanted from him.
"I've got everything outlined."
"I'm being fair." He offered her a nod. "Good for you." It wasn't sarcastic, wasn't bitter, just neutral. Like she was a neighbor informing him the fence needed painting. "You're not even going to ask why?" she asked, voice rising just slightly.
Owen resumed slicing. "Does it change your decision?"
"No, but then it doesn't matter." That was when Lena felt it, the unsteadiness. Not from a man pleading or breaking, but from a man who was already gone. He didn't protest because he didn't need to. He wasn't hurt. He was finished. She stabbed a carrot with her fork, chewed it with too much force, like it had insulted her.
Owen finally sat, poured himself half a glass of red wine. Didn't offer her any.
He took a sip and sighed, like someone untying a knot they'd lived with too long.
"You really don't care," she said, eyes narrowed.
"I did. For a long time." He looked across at her with a strange softness. "Now, I care about peace." "Peace," she scoffed. "You've been angry since 2005. He nodded.
"And I'm tired of it."
"So congratulations. You're free." The word free rang hollow in her mouth. It didn't taste the way she'd imagined. "I'll stay here," she added quickly, trying to anchor herself to something.
"You can go find somewhere else." Owen stood without hesitation, picked up both plates, even hers, though she hadn't finished, and walked him to the sink.
He turned on the faucet, rinsed his hands under the stream, and dried them with the same old checkered towel she'd crocheted 2 decades ago. He didn't say a word.
But in that silence, Lena felt something she hadn't rehearsed.
Not relief, not victory, doubt. Lena had always thought endings came with noise, slammed doors, shouted accusations, a storm of emotions washing away the debris of a broken marriage. But this was just quiet. Too quiet. The next morning, the kitchen felt like a stage after the audience had gone home. Owen's mug was gone.
His boots no longer sat by the door.
The morning newspaper she always found neatly folded on the table.
Absent.
The coffee pot was still warm, though. That meant he'd been here. Briefly.
Lena sat alone, toast untouched, eyes scanning the space as if it might explain something to her.
The silence wasn't peaceful, it was oppressive. It pressed against her chest like a weight she couldn't name.
She wandered through the house.
The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner. That was Owen. He always cleaned when something felt off. She passed by the study, saw his books missing from the shelves. Just gaps now, like teeth pulled from an old smile.
His side of the closet was empty, save for a few wire hangers swaying gently from their bar.
He was gone, and he didn't make a sound.
By noon, she checked her phone at least 30 times.
No missed calls,
No texts,
no dramatic final words,
no desperate attempts to salvage what they'd had.
not even a receipt from the lawyer.
He'd just left.
She should have been relieved.
She'd wanted this, hadn't she? Freedom.
A new chapter, a fresh start.
Then why did it feel like someone had torn the rug out from beneath her and replaced it with a hole?
She poured herself a glass of wine, even though it was barely past lunch.
Sat by the bay window, the same one they used to decorate together every Christmas, and stared out at the garden. Owen had loved that garden.
Maintained it with military precision. Trimmed hedges, weedless soil, perfect blooms.
But today, she saw something odd.
The tulips, they were gone.
Dug out completely.
All of them. Not a single bulb remained.
She rushed outside barefoot, the lawn still wet from morning dew, dropped to her knees by the flower bed.
Bare earth.
Smooth.
Intentional.
He hadn't just walked away. He'd erased himself. That night, she went to dinner at her sister-in-law's house.
A girl's night.
Wine. Laughter.
Distraction.
At least, that was the idea. So, it's final then?
Carrie asked, pouring her a generous glass of ROS.
Lena nodded.
He didn't even argue. Just nodded. Said he'd sign the next day. Carrie raised her eyebrows. Wow.
Cold. Not cold, Lena said.
Worse.
Calm. Her friends offered comforting noises, rolling their eyes and murmuring about stoic men and midlife crises.
Good riddance, someone muttered.
Now you can start fresh.
Lena smiled. Forced.
Hollow. But then Carrie said it. Oh, by the way.
I ran into Owen yesterday. At the lumber store of Pine Ridge. Lena blinked. You did? Carrie nodded. Yeah.
Looked different.
Relaxed. Lighter, somehow. Lighter, Lena repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. He was with someone. The words dropped like stones into her stomach. What do you mean with someone?
Carrie shrugged. Tall woman.
Brunette. Probably early 40s. They looked. Close. Close. It echoed through Lena's mind all night, long after she'd returned home.
She stared at the ceiling, her glass of wine untouched beside her bed. She hadn't thought about Owen since she told him she wanted out.
Not really. He was dependable. Predictable.
A man of routines and silence.
So why did it bother her now that he'd moved on without a scene?
Without her. The sun had just dipped behind the ridge when Clara finally caught sight of it at the cabin.
Tucked beneath a canopy of towering pines. Its warm amber glow spilled gently from the windows like a memory come to life. It was far more beautiful than she expected. And that surprised her. Not because Caleb had never shown ambition, but because she had never imagined him executing a dream without her input. She parked the rental car at the edge of the gravel path. Dust swirled lazily around the tires, settling like time itself.
Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned off the ignition.
The wine bottle on the passenger seat clinked against the seatbelt.
She had chosen it carefully not because Caleb liked it.
He hated Merlot, but because it reminded her of their second anniversary. The night she laughed too loudly in a restaurant and he still kissed her under the streetlight. Her heels crunched the gravel with each step, deliberate but unsure.
She walked up to the cabin like someone approaching a sacred place they once abandoned.
The porch was made of reclaimed wood, sanded and sealed to perfection. Planters filled with rosemary, mint, and lavender lined the edges, and Clara felt that sinking twist in her chest, the kind of pain that isn't born of loss, but of realization. He had rebuilt, not just a home, a life. She hesitated at the door, hand raised to knock when it creaked open from the inside.
And there she was.
A woman with ash blonde hair pulled into a loose braid, wearing jeans and a navy flannel, sleeves rolled up like she belonged there.
Her name was Ivy. Clara recognized her instantly.
Ivy Prescott, the quiet cousin who had always lingered after holiday dinners, washing dishes while Clara scrawled on her phone. Ivy, the one who sat beside Caleb at the hospital when Clara had other things to handle during his gallbladder surgery.
Ivy turned calmly, saw her, and simply said, "You're early." Clara blinked. "Excuse me. She told me you'd show up," Ivy added, stepping aside so the light caught her face. Eventually, then Caleb appeared behind her, not frazzled, not startled, calm, present.
He was wiping his hands with a cloth, wearing a black thermal shirt that clung to broader shoulders than Clara remembered. His beard was trimmed, his eyes steady.
He didn't flinch. "Clara," he said simply.
"That's all you have to say." He tilted his head. "What would you like me to say?" There it was again, that maddening calm. She had imagined this moment in loops, Caleb shouting, pleading, maybe throwing a sarcastic jab or two.
But this serenity, it rattled her.
"You built this?" she asked, gesturing vaguely at the cabin. He nodded.
"With Ivy, you two live here. Together?" Ivy poured a second glass of wine from the counter and handed it to Caleb.
"We do more than live," she said, her voice even.
"We built something from the ground up. Every board,
every beam." There was no cruelty in her tone, just clarity. Clara's eyes darted around. The cabin's interior was open, organized, glowing with soft lights and the scent of baked apples and cedarwood.
There was a bookshelf full,
a fireplace crackling, 2 coats on a rack, 2 toothbrushes in a glass near the sink. You're serious? Clara whispered. This isn't a joke. It never was, Caleb replied.
You just assumed nothing could happen without you. The words fell like a guillotine.
Clara took a step back. You left, Ivy added, but you never imagined he'd actually.
Life. Clara opened her mouth, but the defense never arrived.
All her arguments how he never initiated anything, how she carried the marriage, they rang hollow now, swallowed by the simplicity of what stood before her. You were supposed to be miserable, she finally muttered. I was, Caleb said, for a while.
And then I remembered how to breathe. Clara looked at him. This man she thought she knew.
Not flashy, not ambitious, but steady.
And apparently capable of far more than she ever gave him credit for.
I didn't come here to fight, she said at last, her voice softer.
I know, he replied. You came to see if there was anything left. He took a sip of wine. There isn't. The cabin door shut behind her with a soft click, sealing Clara inside a world she no longer recognized. The room was warm to warm, as if it rejected her presence, even as it welcomed the wind outside.
Caleb had already turned back to the counter, calmly slicing a loaf of bread. The rhythmic sound of the knife against the wooden board echoed louder than it should have, carving into the silence like judgment. Ivy didn't leave the room. She stood near the hearth, adjusting the throw on a chair like it was her place because it was.
Clara stayed standing, arms at her sides, unsure whether she should sit, speak, or scream. You don't seem surprised to see me, she finally said.
Caleb didn't look up.
Why would I be?
Because I'm your wife. He did glance at her, then not with bitterness or sarcasm, but a strange detachment. You were. The 2 words flattened her. She hadn't expected affection, but she also hadn't anticipated being treated like a chapter he'd already closed. I didn't come to fight, she said again, but it rang hollow.
Caleb nodded.
Good.
I don't have the appetite for it. He poured olive oil into a small dish, sprinkled herbs over it. His movements were deliberate, composed, the opposite of the man she used to belittle for overthinking every little task. Now, that same meticulousness felt evolved.
Clara looked at Ivy.
And you think this is okay?
Helping tear apart a marriage?
Ivy tilted her head slightly.
You're asking the wrong question. What the hell does that mean? I didn't help tear anything down, she said calmly.
I helped him rebuild. Clara laughed dry, incredulous. Oh, that's rich.
You 2 building cabins and metaphors out here in the woods. Ivy didn't flinch. At least we're building. That stuck.
Because Clara had been sitting in a downtown condo for months, surrounded by granite countertops and silence. She had thought walking away would give her clarity, that distance would make her desirable again.
She'd imagined Caleb desperate, alone, texting her at midnight to say he missed her. Instead, she was the one showing up uninvited.
You don't know what we had, Clara snapped.
I know what he has now, Ivy answered softly. Caleb finally turned toward her, setting the bread on the table.
You came here for something, Clara.
What was it? Her jaw clenched.
Closure. He gave a slight nod.
Then let me offer it. He walked to the small cabinet near the stairs and pulled out a single box. Not large, not heavy. He placed it on the kitchen table between them and opened it slowly like he was unveiling a relic. Inside were pieces of a shared life, a photo from their honeymoon, a note she once wrote him on a post-it that said, "Don't you forget I love you," and a tiny clay sculpture their daughter made when she was 5. Clara stared at it, all relics of a life she had assumed would always be on standby. You kept these? She whispered.
Caleb nodded.
For a while, they gave me hope. Then they became weights. He pushed a box gently toward her. Take them, if you want them, but I can't carry them anymore. Her throat tightened.
So this is it?
He looked at her with a calm that broke her more than anger ever could.
It already was.
Silence fell again. But it wasn't the old silence of resentment. It was finality. The kind that doesn't beg or explain. The kind that arrives like winter quiet, inevitable, permanent. Clara didn't cry. Not yet.
But she stood there holding the box like it might anchor her in a life that no longer needed her weight.
Clara didn't remember walking out of the cabin. 1 minute, she was standing at the table with that box in her hands, and the next, she was outside, stumbling down the wooden steps like the wind had pushed her out.
The box felt heavier now, not physically, but emotionally, like each item inside had tripled in weight, swollen with unspoken regret. Her car sat under the pines, partially buried in needles.
She stared at it, not moving.
She hadn't come for this.
She'd imagined something else, maybe a conversation, a chance to explain, a door left slightly open. Instead,
Caleb had handed her a tomb of their marriage, neatly archived and sealed.
She set the box in the passenger seat and climbed into the driver's side, but didn't start the engine. The silence inside the car was deafening, the kind that followed explosions.
Through the windshield, she saw the cabin.
Cozy.
Alive.
There was light spilling out of the kitchen window now, casting a golden square onto the porch. Two shadows moved behind the curtain, Caleb and Ivy, working together in quiet rhythm. Not lovers caught in a torrid affair, but something worse. Companions who'd learned to move in sync.
Clara's throat tightened.
She remembered all the times Caleb had asked her to go hiking. Let's just get out of town, he'd say. Fresh air might help. But she'd always had an excuse: work, errands, something trivial.
To her, the wilderness was pointless.
To him, it had been sanctuary. She'd never understood that. Until now.
Because now, she wasn't invited into the piece. She was on the outside looking in, a visitor in a story she used to star in.
The door opened again. Ivy stepped out, barefoot on the wooden porch, holding a small plate wrapped in cloth. She walked down the steps like she wasn't afraid of anything: the cold, the dark, even Clara. Clara opened the window slightly as Ivy approached. I thought you might want something warm for the drive, Ivy said, placing the plate on the car roof.
It's rosemary bread. Caleb's recipe, though I just watched. Clara wanted to refuse. Her pride screamed at her to say nothing, to roll the window up and drive off. But something held her still.
Ivy didn't move. Clara finally asked, do you love him? The question escaped her lips like a secret she hadn't meant to share.
Ivy didn't answer right away.
She looked down, thoughtful.
Then she said, I respect him. I trust him.
I see him. Clara flinched. Those three verbs struck harder than any declaration of love could.
Respect. Trust.
See.
She realized then how many years she'd treated Caleb like furniture, something useful, stable, background.
And now someone else had walked into the same room and actually seen him.
Ivy looked back toward the house.
We're not perfect. We just chose to try. And me, Clara whispered.
Ivy turned back.
You chose to leave. That was the line. Not said with anger.
No smugness.
Just fact.
Ivy turned and walked back to the house, the hem of her dress brushing against her ankles as she disappeared into the light.
Clara sat in her car for a long time.
Long enough for the bread to go cold. Long enough for the lights in the cabin to dim. Then finally, she drove away. She didn't cry.
Not yet. But the road blurred anyway.
The sun was beginning to drop behind the mountains, bleeding gold across the treetops as Claire's car weaved down the winding road. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The untouched rosemary bread sat beside her on the passenger seat, wrapped in its tidy cloth, like a mocking farewell gift. She had meant to be stronger. She had meant to walk into that cabin with steel in her spine, to speak clearly and take back control of the narrative. But the second she saw Caleb in that light, calm, collected, changed, her resolve had crumbled. And Ivy was not the threat Clara had expected. She wasn't seductive or smug. She wasn't even angry. She was solid, steady, and maddeningly kind. Clara didn't hate her. That made it worse. She drove until the road flattened, until pine trees gave way to barren fields and the air lost its wild scent. The silence in the car pressed against her skin, begging her to think, to rewind, to ask the questions she had buried for months. What did she expect Caleb to do? To break? To beg? To fall apart so she could be the one who had it all figured out? But he didn't. He had moved on. Not as a rebellion, but as a release. And that made Claire feel less like a villain and more like a ghost. She pulled into a gas station on the edge of a small town, one of those lonely outposts that smelled like old coffee and dust. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she stepped inside, numb, her hands searching for something, anything, to anchor her. She grabbed a bottle of water, then paused at the shelf of postcards. One caught her eye, a photograph of a lake at sunset, surrounded by pine trees. Almost identical to the one from their trip to Timber Hollow all those years ago. She picked it up. On the back, there was a quote in faded cursive print. Sometimes, the silence after goodbye is where we finally hear the truth. She swallowed hard. The truth was that Clara had stopped listening long before she said, I'm done. She remembered all the times Caleb tried to open up about work, about his father's health, about how he felt like he was living on autopilot. She had nodded, murmured something supportive, then reached for her phone. Always the phone, always something more important than him. And when she had walked away, she had expected the universe to pause. But it hadn't. Caleb had simply picked up the pieces, not to win her back, but to finally put himself first. She stood there for a moment longer, the postcard in her hand, then slowly returned it to the rack. Back in the car, she turned the engine on and pulled onto the road. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her sister. "Hey, just saw your post. You okay?" Clara stared at the screen. She hadn't posted anything. She opened Instagram and saw a photo of Caleb and Ivy side by side on the porch. Ivy was laughing. Caleb was holding a mug. The caption, posted by someone else at the cabin build site, read, "The Dream Team." Love watching this cabin come to life. Hundreds of likes, comments, emojis. Clara couldn't look away. The man in the photo wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. She closed the app, locked her phone, and dropped it in the center console. The road stretched ahead, empty and unfamiliar. And finally, Clara whispered aloud to no one, "I don't know who that man is anymore." She didn't mean it with bitterness. She meant it with awe, because now, maybe, she wished she had.
The next morning, Clara didn't open her curtains.
The light had lost its comfort. It didn't warm her anymore. It exposed her. Her apartment felt both too quiet and too loud.
Every creak in the floor, every tick of the kitchen clock, every distant hum of traffic reminded her that she was alone.
Not in the cinematic, wine glass on the balcony kind of alone, but the kind that echoed.
She made coffee out of habit, not need.
She didn't drink it.
Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone like it might deliver a verdict.
But there were no new texts.
No missed calls. Nothing from Caleb. Nothing from Ivy.
Even her sister hadn't followed up.
It was like the world had conspired to stop acknowledging her, like her relevance had expired the moment she walked out of Caleb's life. She opened Instagram again.
Her finger hovered over Ivy's profile. She hadn't followed her before, but now she knew the username. She typed it in.
Private. The profile photo was a blurred shot of a pine forest. The bio. Just building something that feels like home. No followers in common.
No public posts. Clara let the phone drop into her lap.
She stared out the window, eyes unfocused.
That phrase, building something that feels like home, lodged in her mind like a splinter. She'd spent decades thinking of home as a physical space. Something to decorate, clean, complain about. Caleb had seen it differently. To him, home was peace.
It was mutual respect. It was being seen. And he hadn't felt that with her in years. The truth began settling in like dust.
It wasn't that Ivy had stolen Caleb.
It was that Clara had stopped investing. She thought back to the dinners where she scrolled through her phone, to the birthdays she rushed through, to the dreams he shared and she labeled too impractical. She'd become the voice that dampened instead of encouraged, that closed instead of opened. She hadn't. He just exited the marriage. She'd vacated it long before she ever signed a piece of paper.
She stood, walked to the bathroom mirror, and stared at herself.
Her reflection wasn't angry. It looked tired.
Tired of holding up an image that no longer matched her reality.
She leaned closer.
"What are you afraid of?"
she whispered.
The answer came faster than she expected. "That he really is better without me." Her phone buzzed again.
It wasn't Caleb. It was Emma. Not a message. A story post. Just one photo. The cabin porch. A hand, Caleb's, unmistakably holding a book next to a mug of coffee. The caption. Sometimes all it takes is one person who believes you're enough. Clara's breath hitched. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even meant for her.
But it gutted her anyway, because once she could have been that person.
But she chose not to be.
3 days later, Clara found herself driving west.
No clear destination. Just a set of coordinates saved from an old property listing Caleb had once forwarded her back when he still shared dreams with her. She had scoffed at it back then.
"You want to live off-grid like some mountain hermit." Now, the location whispered to her like a ghost of choices unmade.
The rental car's GPS flickered as the road thinned, giving way to gravel, then to packed dirt, then to nothing but memory. Pines leaned in from both sides. The sky above narrowed into a tunnel of sun-streaked green. And then the cabin. It wasn't small.
It was intentional.
Every beam, every planter box, every hand-stained window frame sang the same thing. Someone gave a damn.
A new porch swing creaked in the wind, while time curled around stone paths like nature was applauding. Clara parked.
She didn't kill the engine.
Her fingers trembled over the steering wheel. She hadn't planned this. No warning,
No call ahead, just presence. Maybe she wanted him to see her.
Maybe she just wanted to be seen.
She stepped out, her boots crunching the gravel.
No one emerged. Then the door creaked open.
Emma, rolled sleeves, calm face.
Holding a mason jar of something yellow, maybe honey, maybe lemon preserve.
She didn't flinch.
She just nodded.
He's inside, that was all.
No tension, no gloating.
Clara stepped onto the porch, heart hammering.
She didn't knock.
She walked in. The smell hit her first.
Not must or dust, but rosemary, firewood,
Coffee. It smelled lived in.
loved.
Caleb was seated at the longwood table, sanding a curved piece of oak. His hair was a little longer. He wore glasses. He looked at ease, not surprised, not angry, just still.
Hi, Clara managed.
He nodded once. Clara, a beat of silence passed. She looked around. No clutter, no chaos, just clean tools, framed photos, one of him standing beside a finished wall, arms slung over Emma's shoulder. Clara swallowed. I didn't expect, I know. She fumbled. I needed to see. Another pause.
Caleb put down the sanding block, and her voice cracked.
It's real. This place.
You.
Her. Yes. Silence returned, thick and choking. You moved on, she said, like it was a crime. I rebuilt, he corrected. I didn't take anything from you, Clara.
I just stopped waiting. She sat down opposite him without asking.
I wasn't ready to let go, but you already did, he said. You just didn't admit it. That hurt more than she expected.
I regret how things ended, she whispered. Caleb nodded. Me too. Her eyes welled. Is there a version of this
where we find our way back? He didn't hesitate. No. Clara exhaled like she'd been punched. It's not anger, he added gently. It's clarity. We broke something that can't be glued, and pretending otherwise just wounds both of us more. Ivy, Clara began.
Emma, he corrected. She flinched.
Right, Emma. She's really part of your life now. She built this with me, he said.
She believed in something before it had walls. Clara looked at the floor.
I never meant to hurt you, she said.
I know, he replied.
You just didn't try hard not to. The words landed like a hammer wrapped in silk. She stood slowly. I should go. Caleb didn't stop her, but before she reached the door, he said, Thank you for coming. She turned.
His voice was steady, not sarcastic.
Not bitter. It was gratitude. For what? She asked, hollow.
For letting it be real. For not pretending we can undo it. Clara nodded. Then she stepped outside. The sun had shifted.
The wind smelled like lavender, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a wife returning to reclaim something. She felt like a visitor.
And maybe that was all she'd ever been.
Clara drove until the mountains vanished in the rearview mirror and the sky turned the color of pewter. By the time she reached the motel, one of those faded, neon-lit husks on the interstate, her mind was a churn of images. Caleb's focused hands,
Emma's steady gaze,
the cabin's quiet glow, the smell of rosemary lingering in her coat.
She checked in with the practiced numbness of a frequent traveler, accepted a plastic key card, and climbed to a second-floor room that smelled of detergent and air conditioning coils.
She tried the television, but the noise only made the silence inside her head louder. She tried the motel Wi-Fi, but the login page froze, forcing her to confront herself without distraction. So she opened the box Caleb had given her. It sat on the bedspread like a time capsule. One by one, she lifted the relics, a faded Polaroid of them in New Orleans, 23 years old, sweaty, laughing, drunk on cheap hurricanes and possibility. The posted note, Don't forget. I love you, still faintly sticky in one corner.
A concert ticket stub from a jazz club he had dragged her to. She'd complained about the cover charge that night, but afterward told everyone it was her idea.
The tiny lopsided clay bear their daughter, Harper, had sculpted in kindergarten. And beneath all of that, something she hadn't noticed before, a folded sheet of lined paper, yellowed at the edges.
Caleb's handwriting.
5 things I want written June 4th. 205, a cabin in the mountains, small, sturdy, quiet.
A workbench where I can build things with my hands.
A garden of herbs my wife will use in our meals.
A place to sit with friends and hear nothing but wind in the pines.
Peace.
Clara traced the words with her fingertip, feeling each letter like a braille message from their past.
She remembered that day he had shown her the list, shyly, after a long hike on their 10th anniversary.
She'd laughed. Sounds rustic, she'd said, and changed the subject to plane tickets for Maui.
She'd forgotten the list. He hadn't.
And he'd achieved every single line, just not with her.
A sob built in her chest, but stopped halfway, turning into a ragged exhale. Tears would be easy.
Tears would let her frame herself as the wounded one.
But truth didn't want tears tonight.
It wanted admission.
She whispered into the empty room. I left first. The words tasted like rust and release.
Because leaving isn't always a suitcase and a slammed door.
Sometimes it's eyes drifting to a phone at dinner.
It's saying, we'll go next year, until all the next years evaporate. It's hearing a dream and replying with a budget critique.
She sat on the scratchy motel carpet, legs crossed, holding that scrap of paper, and let the realization settle, cell by cell. Caleb owed her nothing. Not closure, not forgiveness, not a seat on the porch he built with someone who believed in him. What she owed herself was different. A reckoning, then a path forward.
She found a pen in the motel drawer, blue ink, dried at the tip.
She clicked it against the paper as margin, and below Caleb's list she wrote her own, shaky, honest, 5 things I will do written today. Apologize to my own dreams for neglecting them.
Learn to listen without a phone in my hand.
Build something anything without waiting for praise. Forgive myself for confusing comfort with love.
Make peace mean action, not avoidance.
She folded the sheet, slid it back into the box, and closed the lid.
Not to bury it, but to carry it.
Outside, trucks groaned along the interstate, heading west, or east, or somewhere in between.
She realized how strange it was that entire lives could pivot on a single exit ramp. A single yes, a single maybe next year.
From the balcony rail, she could see a sign glowing in red letters. Diner, open 24 hours. She grabbed her coat. Inside the diner, a college kid behind the counter greeted her with a tired smile. 2 truckers nursed coffees at a corner booth.
No one knew her story, or Caleb's, or Ivy's, and that anonymity felt like mercy.
She ordered black coffee and a slice of pecan pie, the kind Caleb loved, but she always said was too sweet. It tasted imperfect, messy,
alive.
She took out her phone, opened a blank note, and started typing an email not to Caleb, but to her daughter.
She wrote about mistakes, about love, about what it means to stay curious about the people we think we know.
She didn't hit send. Not yet.
But it was a beginning.
When she returned to the motel, dawn was bleeding pink into the east.
She showered, packed, and placed the memory box on the passenger seat next to the untouched rosemary bread.
She turned the key, rolled onto the highway, and headed south. No GPS this time. Just instinct. Maybe she'd stop in Boulder. Maybe Santa Fe. Maybe she'd find a cabin of her own to rent for a season, to learn what silence sounds like when it isn't punishment. She didn't know, and for the first time in years, not knowing felt like freedom instead of failure. As the cabin and the mountains shrank in her rearview mirror, Clara whispered a final goodbye, not to Caleb, not to Emma, but to the version of herself who needed someone else's permission to start over. The road curved, and she followed.